everyone. Welcome. On behalf of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for Pollinators and Their Native Plants, a three-part virtual presentation series with ecological landscape designer Maya Goer-Palenzuela. My name is Ellie Reese. I am the Program and Outreach Coordinator at the Woodstock Land Conservancy and a member of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway Planning Committee. The Woodstock Pollinator Pathway is dedicated to creating essential habitat in our community for our vital and vulnerable pollinators. We are a collaborative project of the Woodstock Land Conservancy, the Catskill Center, the Woodstock Environmental Commission, Woodstock Transition, and community member partners. We encourage you to visit our website to access our many resources and join the pathway. Our website and any other resources I mentioned in this introduction will be put in the chat once the presentation starts. We hope you will support our programming and the project as a whole by making a donation at the link that will be added to the chat shortly. Just a few housekeeping things to note. We'll have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation. You can feel free to enter your question into the chat at any time. As your Zoom host tonight, if you have any technical questions or concerns, please feel free to send me a direct message in the chat. This program is being recorded and will be emailed to all registered in the coming days, along with any resources mentioned. So why are we here tonight? Why are pollinators so important? Native pollinators have co-evolved over millennia in a symbiotic partnership with their host plants to ensure both survival. If pollinators ceased to exist, 90% of the world's flowering plants would die and in turn threaten the survival of the human race. For the first of her three-part program series, Maya will highlight the unique characteristics of native pollinators, which play an incredibly important role in the health of our ecosystem. Now I'd like to introduce Maya Goer-Palenzuela. Maya is a New York Botanical Garden certified landscape designer. She designs native landscapes for her business, Harmonyscape Landscape Design. I'll put the link in the chat. Based in Stanfordville, New York. Thank you so much, Maya, for joining us tonight. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Big thanks to the Woodstock Land Conservancy and for everybody who is on today and interested in learning more about pollinators. I am a landscape designer, and just like a quick thing to tell you about, how I got involved in this. I've been a horticulturalist for about a little over 20 years, and I started working on a private estate and trained in a very different way than how I work now with landscapes. And it was like an English style, and everything had to be pruned and perfect, and any dead leaf you take it away. And as I thought that was the best way, it sure did look very neat, and every garden on the property was photograph ready and everything. But when I started to go more into landscape design and look into methods that were sustainable and eco-friendly, I realized that everything that I had learned was wrong. I mean, pretty much. And I had to relearn everything that I had been taught. And for the benefit of the environment, a lot of my landscapes tend to be very low maintenance because you're just not as involved. I decided to integrate that type of methodology into my ethos and the philosophy behind the designs I do, because I feel like it is so important. Especially as I, am very very in tune with all of these newsletters and articles I get about the plight of the pollinator. So anyway, I'm sure I am preaching to the choir. So I will start this presentation. And the presentation this time, this part of the series is just about pollinators, because, even as I researched pollinators, I realized that I had been guilty of squishing things like pupa and larvae of beneficial bugs. And I said, I want to make sure that nobody has to do this. So, yeah, I will share this. And I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and just as a caveat, just also, I'm a landscape designer. I am not a biologist. So if you have any of, I can try my best to answer those types of questions. But, here I've just listed a lot of the resources that I use to put together this, this presentation. Okay, so who are the pollinators? Pollinators provide a key ecosystem service vital to the maintenance of both wild and agricultural plant communities. Although birds, bats, and other creatures are also pollinators, insects are the animals that do the bulk of the pollination that affects our daily lives. Today's pollinators are considered to be in a state of decline. Declines in the health and population of pollinators pose what could be a significant threat to the integrity of biodiversity, to global food webs, and to human health. The quality of pollinator service has declined over time, and this has led to concerns that pollinators will be less resistant to extinction in the future. So first we'll talk about solitary bees. And these were the little guys I was talking about that I know that I had found, while messing around in my garden. I know I was like, well, these are gross looking things. And I, threw them out there for a bird to eat when I should have just left them alone. Solitary bees. Worldwide, there are an estimated 20,000 species of bees, and approximately 3,600 species are native to the United States and Canada alone. Of these myriad bee species, more than 90% lead solitary lives in which each female constructs and provisions her own nests without the assistance of others. So this was very important to me because it was just so contrary to what I thought about with bees. I always thought they always lived in a hive. I think of, a beekeeper and a colony. So just this notion that there are solitary bees was really, it's really struck me. About 30% of solitary bee species use abandoned beetle burrows or other tunnels in snags, which are dead or dying standing trees. Alternatively, they may chew at a nest within the soft central pith of stems and twigs, which is another reason why I like to leave all plant material alone from, fall. And I will also mostly leave it down for the spring too, but I know some people like to cut things down so it looks neat and fresh. Usually there's a time in the spring when you can do this safely and the pollinators have emerged and they're already doing all their necessary things. The other, roughly 70%, nest in the ground, digging tunnels in bare or sparsely vegetated, well-drained soil. A few species nest in eclectic places, such as empty snail shells and pot-like cells that they construct on twigs from pebbles and tree resin. Oh my God. Bees are also important pollinators of a variety of plants, possessing hairs and other specialized anatomical structures that readily collect and transfer pollen. And I think what we're talking about here is the bumblebee, which uses a buzz pollination, to which some flowers specifically rely on in order to thrive. And I apologize about this. I did have some videos that I tried to embed into this presentation, but it didn't work out. So instead, please enjoy cute photos of a solitary bee. So here are the bumblebees I was talking about, and here you have their Latin name. Bumblebees are important pollinators of wild flowering plants and agricultural crops. They are able to fly in cooler temperatures and lower light levels than many other bees, making them excellent pollinators, especially at higher elevations and latitudes. They perform buzz pollination, which involves grasping a flower in their jaws and vibrating their wing muscles to dislodge the pollen. Many plants, including a number of wildflowers and crops like tomatoes, peppers, and cranberries, benefit from buzz pollination. Because they are essential pollinators, the loss of bumblebees can have far-ranging ecological consequences. Bumblebees are the only bees native to North America that are truly social. They live in colonies which have an annual life cycle. At the end of the summer, the foundress queen, her workers, and male offspring will all die. Only the newly emerged fertilized queens survive to hibernate through the winter. In the spring, she will found a new nest that eventually may grow, depending on the species and available resources, to 50 to 500 individuals. Bumblebees need a cavity in which to build their nest. Sometimes this is above ground, such as in hollow trees, abandoned bird nests, rock walls, or under a tussock of grass, but they mostly nest underground. The queen creates the first brood cells from wax and then provisions them with pollen and nectar and lays eggs. The queen will continue to lay eggs and the colony will grow steadily through the summer. At the end of summer, new queens and drones will emerge and mate. Bumblebees have an annual life cycle and generally only occupy nest sites for 1 year. So, sometimes I would see a bumblebee at the end of the season, just laying there dead on my deck or something. And I would be like, oh my God, and freak out. Sometimes without actually taking that bee and bringing it to a lab, I might just think now, well, it was the end of its life cycle. Hopeful. Aw, and a little cute. So for those of you who don't know, there is an Instagram page all about bumblebee butts. I highly recommend. And then we have butterflies and moths. Both butterflies and moths begin life as eggs laid on or near the species' host plant. Each hatches as a tiny, soft-bodied caterpillar, eating and growing until it forms into a pupa or chrysalis. Most well-managed landscapes can offer all a butterfly or moth needs to complete its life cycle. Butterflies and moths need a host plant for their developing caterpillars, and most adults need to fuel their flight and mating with nectar from flowers. They also need sites in which to overwinter and rest. Lastly, they need areas that are free from insecticides. Most of the butterflies at risk of extinction are rare endemics, those species that have a narrow geographic range or very specific habitat requirements. However, lepidopterists across the United States are reporting that broadly distributed butterflies are also in decline. Butterflies face a wide range of threats, including habitat loss, climate change, disease, pesticide, and invasive plants. More localized threats, such as overgrazing and roadside mowing, can also have negative consequences. This was also a rude awakening for me when I used to plant, butterfly gardens, and found that what I was doing was just feeding butterflies at a specific time and wasn't really giving them much else in terms of habitat. So this is also, very important. I think sometimes professionals will call it a butterfly suck, where you are doing things to the landscape at certain times and therefore really causing a lot of harm, where it's almost like a trap, like you're inviting all these butterflies and moths and pollinators into a site, and they say, oh, this looks wonderful, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to raise my young, and yeah, they've got stuff to eat. And then all of a sudden you do something like brush hog the field or something, which just disrupts everything and has a huge impact. And here's just like a little difference between, I also learned a lot about how to tell the difference between a butterfly and a moth. So wasps, it might be like a like a bad, 4-letter word, a wasp. No one likes wasps, but there are so many different types of beneficial wasps that do not sting or do not bother you as humans. Wasps are wrongly maligned due to the reputation for being aggressive. In reality, they are adept hunters that we wouldn't want to live without. They're doing us all a great service in keeping insect populations in balance and managing pests. They are counted among the great many beneficial insects that can be utilized for conservation, biological control. Many wasps are smooth-bodied and do not actively collect pollen. Those with hairs lack the branched pollen-trapping hairs found on most bees, making them relatively minor pollinators of most plants. Nonetheless, they do provide some incidental pollination, carrying and dropping some pollen grains as they move among flowers. But not only do they engage a little bit in pollination, but they are great for insect control. Like the the picture in my head right now is, of a tomato hornworm, and you see this giant, first of all, you notice your tomato plant is disappearing, and then all of a sudden this big fat juicy caterpillar emerges, and you say, that's what's been eating it. And I usually just like to leave them alone, and lo and behold, one day you find that your hornworm is covered in all these little white sacs. And this is a type of wasp that will come and lay its eggs, unfortunately, on the back of the caterpillar, so that when they emerge, they will eat the caterpillar alive. But it's just the way of the world, I guess. And even though it's sad, it's a very interesting thing to watch in the garden. I love this photo. And here we have flies. With over 85,000 species worldwide, flies form one of the most diverse orders of insects, Diptera. Although a number of these species are reviled as crop pests and carriers of disease, Many are beneficial, from the aquatic midges that serve as an abundant food source for migratory birds to the fly pollinators of apples, peppers, mangoes, and cashews. Because flies are generalist foragers with no nest to provision and sometimes sparsely haired bodies, they don't get much credit as significant pollinators. However, they can be important pollinators for specific plants. I find tachnid flies, a lot of different types of flies in my garden, and they don't look like the fly that you swat out that's stuck in your kitchen and you don't know how long it's going to be there and get upset at it. But there are many beautifully colored little flies, like that may be on a array of an aster or something like that. And through identifying them, I found out that they were indeed flies, and I was like, oh my God, these things are gorgeous, and look at them go. And this is one of the many joys that I get out of home gardening that I'm sure many of you on the program today also enjoy. And sorry about this video again. Ooh. And now we have beetles. And beetles are in the order Coleoptera and represent the greatest diversity of any group of animals. There are more than 340,000 described species worldwide, including nearly 30,000 species in North America alone, making it the largest order of insects. Beetles are important as they provide a whole variety of ecosystem services. They are predators of crop pests, dung beetles, and carrion beetles, help keep ecosystems clean, and many beetles are important pollinators, especially in the tropics. As with other species of insects, beetles are declining due to habitat loss and fragmentation, pesticides, climate change, and potentially light pollution and disease. You can help beetles by providing a variety of native plants in the landscape and not using pesticides. The beetles. I had to throw that in there. I will talk about bats and birds. Bats appeared most consequential to the plants they pollinated, which suffered an 83% decrease in fruit and seed production without these animals. I read a study about this. This is really interesting. Bird-pollinated plants experienced a 45% drop in reproductive output when birds couldn't reach them. And birds are the largest contingent of vertebrate pollinators, with more than 920 species known to pollinate plants across the globe. Among the pollinating birds are hummingbirds, honey eaters, and sunbirds with the long beaks. They pollinate a number of deep-throated flowers. And in our ecoregion, we are very familiar with hummingbirds, and how happy are we when they come back, from Mexico to hum by us and, get their beaks and things like honeysuckle and monarda and things like that. Pollinators are keystone species in most terrestrial ecosystems. Fruits and seeds derived from, well, let me just go back and talk about keystone species for a while. This is a term that I think is just genius. I first heard it used by Doug Tallamy, and it made total sense when you think about an arch and how it's constructed, and the keystone is the middle piece holding the two sides together. And if you remove that keystone, the whole thing collapses. And in the other parts of this series, we'll talk about keystone plants, which also have a very similar role within the landscape, which once they cease to exist anymore, that's when you really find a great deal of population decline in not only pollinators, but also other mammals, reptiles, amphibians. Okay, fruits and seeds derived from insect pollination are a major part of the diet of approximately 25% of all birds and of mammals ranging from redback voles to grizzly bears. Unfortunately, in many places, the essential service of pollination is at risk from habitat loss, pesticide use, and introduced species. One thing to consider was that there are these night blooming plants, you know, that they are pollinated by animals and winged insects that, you know, come out at night. So your moths and your bats are working and feeding and pollinating while the rest of us are sleeping. And think of, you know, even our little voles, which some of us may have a very bad, experience with, because they've eaten our plants in winter or whatever. They do also, you know, contribute to pollination. And here's my little chart. 1 in 3 bites of food we eat are the result of animal-assisted pollination. And if you really think about that, it's alarming to think what our world would be like without them. Livestock that graze on alfalfa or clover depend on these crops to be replenished from insect-pollinated seed. Bees keep agriculture buzzing. Bees and other pollinators are directly responsible for economically and nutritionally important crops across the country. Pollinators assist in the reproduction of plants used for fibers such as cotton and flax. Many animals depend upon the fruits, nuts, and seeds produced as a result of insect pollination, and many pollinators are important food sources for wildlife. Insect-pollinated foods contain key nutrients such as vitamin E that are essential to our diet. Oh, and I skipped this one. Pollinators beautify the planet by keeping Earth's flowering plants blooming. And I like to include that because if you sit and think about every little sentence here, you think about the impact that pollinators have and how important they are, how much we owe to them, really. At least 80% of our world's crop species require pollination to set seed. An estimated 1 out of every 3 bites of food comes to us through the work of animal pollinators. And some troubling statistics. 28% of all North American bumblebee are facing some degree of extinction risk. 19% of butterfly and moth populations are facing decline, including those that are generalists and one with habitat-specific needs. You know, the monarchs were just placed on the endangered list. 5 butterfly species have gone extinct since 1950. 17 species of beetles are listed as threatened or endangered. 60% of beetles are facing decline. Without bats and birds as pollinators, studies show a decline in fruit and seed production of 80%. Pollinator failure leads to food web failure, leads to biodiversity failure, leads to agricultural failure, leads to economic failure, leads to human failure. And now what can I do? So never use any pesticides, including rodenticides, insecticides, herbicides, or chemical fertilizers. And note, organic products are a potential danger to pollinators as well. Plant native plants that are specific to your ecoregion and well suited for your site. And this is to, boost the available nutrition and habitat for our native pollinators. Rethink your lawn, reduce the size, reduce the mowing frequency. Remove invasive plants and rethink alien exotic plant choices. Allow leaves and debris that fall from trees in autumn to remain until spring or in perpetuity. Nothing wrong with that. And go to the Pollinator Pathway website for more information, which is constantly being updated and full of many resources. I can't say enough about the Pollinator Pathway website. And here are just some books and movies that I thought were fun that maybe people would enjoy. Bringing Nature Home, of course, Doug Tallamy, my secret crush. Pollinator Victory Garden. 100 Plants to Feed the Bees, provide a healthy habitat to help pollinators thrive, from the Xerces Society. And movies, Queen of the Sun, What Are the Bees Telling Us? That was really interesting. And that concludes my presentation. So I am really excited to have a little Q&A.
Thank you so much, Maya. Just a note to everybody in the audience, I did not realize until Maya was speaking that the chat was actually closed. So the chat is open now if you'd like to use it to ask questions. We did have a few very savvy people, that did put their questions in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start with the Q&A box questions. Molly asks, I'm worried about the invasives along our streams, mainly the Japanese knotweed. It seems to be taking over and leaving no room for native plants, but the bees love it, then helps to spread it. Why is there no substantial effort to address the invasive plants in the Catskills?
Yeah, this is a topic that I find myself up against a lot, either with Japanese knotweed in particular, or just the like laissez-faire attitude of our county to get involved in something like this. And Japanese knotweed, all I can say about that plant is it is a thug, and it takes a long time to get rid of it. And the best mode of eradication is just manually removing it and just decreasing its ability to thrive. And sometimes it does pretty much fall on the homeowner to take on that bear. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is pretty rough. There is actually some wonderful resources in the Catskills that homeowners, even business owners, can access. The Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership, which some of their staff are a part of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway Planning Committee. You can find them, you can look them up, Catskill Regional Invasive Species Partnership on Google, or they can also be found on the Catskill Center website because they are a project of the Catskill Center. And I'm being reminded that our local nonprofits and DEC are doing much more to deal with invasives. Thank you, Roz. So our next question is from Judith. Judith asks, I have a primarily native meadow, lots of wild bergamot and goldenrod, etc. Do I need to mow it every few years? And if so, what's the best month?
So generally, meadows in this ecoregion are a starting point for a forest. There are a few areas in this area, and there are a few areas in this region that can sustainably stay a meadow. But you know, I don't like mowing meadows at all. You know, I think that people mow meadows to keep down things like woody plants that might spring up, you know, seed themselves in there, or they're concerned about ticks. And I think that the meadow is a lovely place for these plants to actually just kind of figure it out on their own. They encourage things like turkeys to come in and control the ticks. You know, if the woody species, if you have invasive species coming into your meadow, like without a doubt, pull it out. I like to identify what is actually coming into the meadow and see if it is something that is, you know, one of the keystone species in terms of like, is it a birch? Is it an oak? Is it a willow? And so I'll make a little choice based on those things if it fits the criteria.
Thanks, Maya. So our next question comes from Maria. She asks, are there any recommendations of native wildflower plants for Zone 5 specifically?
Well, I guess it would totally depend on what your light situation is. Are we talking about a shaded area, a part shade area, a full sun? There's a lot of things to consider, what your soils are like. And there are many plants that don't necessarily fit into all of those boxes. So really determine, there are certain little tools that I like to use. You can you can take a soil sample over to your local cooperative extension and have it analyzed. And you can also, there's a little meter that I've used before, which you can insert into the soil, and you leave it over the whole day, hold it all day, all night, and it'll tell you what the reading is. You know, you have part sun, part shade, full sun. And also, what is the pH of the soil? Some hints about what I also like to look, you know, locally and find out what is actually growing in this area, and is that a good choice for me when thinking about, you know, adding more plants to my personal landscape.
Great advice. So Roz asks, can you provide any native plant recommendations for very shady, acidic soil with way too many deer? Barberry has already been removed from the area.
Shady, acidic soil. You know, the first thing that comes to mind are things like, you know, kalmia, the beautiful mountain laurels, and rhododendrons, for you know, for those types of sites. I love seeing them grow in colonies, and I think in Woodstock, I've seen quite a bit of them, you know, just like driving on the side of the road. And those are great. There's also a wild blueberry, which I'm trying to encourage growers to grow, because it does thrive in shade. It's called Vicinium, not angustifolium, it's pallida. And it's like a woodland blueberry, and just kind of fun thing to grow, and it likes rocky type situations.
What would you recommend that's like the most deer resistant for that type of conditions?
This is tough because There are so many variables when considering what deer won't and will eat. I mean, you want to consider the matriarch. Sometimes I blame, grandma for showing the herd where to browse. Okay. And also, how hungry are they? I've seen deer eat things that are poisonous when there's just nothing else available, things like rhododendron. They will eat those leaves. I've even had hellebores, which is a non-native plant, but is also poisonous, and the deer will eat that. Junipers are usually pretty good because they are very spiny and don't feel good on the tongue. I'm trying to think. I've had success on my landscape with the native Pachysandra and Solomon seal. They seem to leave those things alone. Anything in the onion family, they tend to leave alone. And mint they think is just obnoxious and stinky, and they don't really like to eat that. So a lot of mountain mints I like to use too in areas where there's a lot of deer pressure.
Man, we must have like some crazy deer with iron stomachs, because I'm seeing comments in the chat about deer around here regularly eating rhododendron and Solomon seal.
Yeah. Oh, maybe I misspoke. I didn't mean Solomon seal. I meant Jacob's ladder. Sorry, I always like mix those two up. But yeah, rhododendron, they will eat those, especially in the winter, when nothing much else is available. And I think this year, because of the disease that's been affecting the deer for the past few years, the herd, the amount of deer that are around, has lessened. So, and I think it's also disrupted the way that they move, because like I said, they're a matriarchal society. So they usually rely on the doe to show them, who's like the doe that's in charge, to show them where to go and how to browse, and they just keep doing that route. So maybe some of these routes are being disturbed and they're finding other places to eat. I've dealt with customers who say, my neighbor has XYZ and the deer don't eat her stuff, like hostas, but they come here and they munch mine down to nothing. And it's like, well, they just don't want to go over there. It's not on their path. And that's it.
They're funny creatures, aren't they?
Yeah.
Maria asks, and please, I'm going to butcher the name of this plant. I know. I have 2 Buddleia davidi at home. I hope I said that correctly. Planted before the house was hers. Do you recommend that she removes them ASAP?
So Buddleia is one of those plants that I know it has a tendency to reseed in zones that are a little bit warmer than ours. I have found that some of them reseed in this zone too, and the seedling has survived the winter. It used to be thought that species was, borderline hardy. I see it more as a benefit than it is a problem. If you can control it and just be, on the lookout to see if it is spreading and reseeding all over the place, and you can control that by deadheading the flowers and just not letting them get to the point of making seeds. I think they're a wonderful plant that butterflies really enjoy. So yeah, that is, I have a few plants on my list that are non-native that I'm like, this one's not that bad.
So I know that you had said that you prefer specifically not to mow a native meadow at all. In the interest of those who would like to reduce woody growth in their native meadow and would like to mow it on some type of regular schedule, whether it's every other year, every 2 or 3 years, what time of year, like month specifically, would you recommend that they mow to make sure that it's safe and all the pollinators have kind of emerged from their winter habitats?
So I'm sure everyone, or a big part of the audience today, has heard of No Mow May. That would be the time. So, mid to late spring is when I would recommend mowing. Because by then you want to wait until the temperatures have gotten above, I think it's 50 degrees at night, over a period of time. And so at that point, the pollinators aren't overwintering, aren't going down into the ground anymore to find a place where they can not be cold at night. And that's a great time to mow. It also kind of keeps the meadow on the shorter side. Like if you have some big asters or something growing in there, they'll be a little bit, it's almost like doing a Chelsea chop to the plant. But I think that is the safest time, because usually in the fall, when temperatures are cooler, that is when the pollinators really need that that layer of material that came from the year's growth the months before to make it through the winter.
When overwintering insects, they burrow into hollow stalks, etc. What are like the most common plants that solitary bees will nest in, or other overwintering insects? Stuff that we would recognize.
That's a good question. Anything with a hollow stem. So, I've seen them in things like thalictrum, that has like a very delicate, almost hollow stem. That is a perfect place for a pollinator to go. And it all depends on how big they are, right? So little things might find it better to overwinter in an aster or something like that. I'm not really too certain. Like, I don't think I can give a specific answer to the question, because, personally, I just kind of find them everywhere, and I don't know that I could, say like this is the plant that you want to have. But I know when we talk about native plants and keystone species, I think some of those species like goldenrods, asters, are very important to the pollinators, not only for nutrition, but also for their overwintering ability. Well, a way to help those pollinators out in the winter.
Roz also reminds us that some bees nest in Joe Pye weed stems and goldenrod stems, which we mentioned. Yes, goldenrods, one of the keystone species. I love them. They're also beautiful and often mistaken for ragweed.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make you have allergies like ragweed does, which is wonderful. So does anyone else have any other questions for Maya tonight? Oh, here's another question. What do you think about pine needles? I would like to plant wildflowers in a space with pines, but I'm scared that the needles would not let me grow anything.
Pine needles are a great, oh God, I remember a time where I was actually buying bags of pine needles from from the Berkshire Botanical Garden, and those gardeners were really pissed when I showed up, and because they wanted to use the pine needles. They are an excellent mulch, especially for soils that are acidic. As they break down, they help keep the soil acidic. And they have this wonderful fragrance too. I notice, in the summer when it's hot, it's like almost like a really light perfume that I find really attractive. But pine needles are also a thin layer of mulch, so things generally still will grow up in between them, specifically perennials and things like that. Maybe lower, like ground covers or grasses might struggle under a heavy pine needle mulch, but usually things like asters and bulbs come up with no problem.
Of course. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to give one more second for any last minute questions, any burning comments that anybody would like to make. No? Okay, so then I'm going to ask Maya to just remind everybody where they can find her contact information or information about how to engage her to help with their landscapes. So where can we find you, Maya?
Sure. So my website is www.harmonyscape.design. And that's my company website, which has all my contact info on there, and you can look at some projects I've done. This year, I'm excited that a lot of the newer projects are mature enough that they can be photographed. So looking to do a website overhaul next year with beautiful photos.
Sounds lovely. So on behalf of the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway, oh, somebody asked, I'm going to ask you one more question, just because somebody asked this real quick. Are there any plants that can grow under hemlocks?
Hemlocks, yeah, definitely. I like to play with a lot of ephemerals under hemlocks. So, definitely I like to play with things like Dicentra cucullaria, which is like the little Dutchman's breeches, or squirrel corn, which is also a Dicentra. You could even try like Spectabilis, which is a little bit outside of our eco region, but really beautiful. And and also fern, fern will do very well under hemlocks. I've also planted hemlocks with a lot of acid loving plants in the area. So, Kalmia are a very nice companion plant to hemlocks. And yeah, I would love to, hemlocks, they do like, they can tolerate some shade, and sometimes they're very unhappy in a full sun situation. So the plants I'm thinking of are more like shade to part shade, lots of fern, carex, all of our sedges, depending on how moist the soil is, would be a great choice for hemlocks.
That's great information. Molly Holm just wants to let everybody know about a specific film. There's a link in the chat. I will make sure that that resource that Molly has shared with us is included in the email I send out with the recording of tonight's program. So on behalf of the Pollinator Pathway, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight and remind everyone that this is the first of a three-part series. Our next program is February 23rd. And the following is March 23rd, which will end our three-part series. Once again, if you would like to support these programs and the Woodstock Pollinator Project as a whole, please feel free to make a tax-deductible donation at the Woodstock Land Conservancy website. Use that donate button. Just please note that it's for the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway so that we can make sure that those funds are made available only for the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. If you are interested in joining the Woodstock Pollinator Pathway or finding any of the resources that we have available on our website is woodstocknypollinatorpathway.org. We have amazing resources that are very specific to the Woodstock area. And we have all of our recorded programs from months and years past available for anyone to watch at any time. So once again, thanks for coming. Thank you, Maya, for sharing all of your knowledge with us. And everyone have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Hope to see you again in February, everyone.